This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter, batch churned from single origin cream.
We've got a culturing process, a fermenting process, an aging process. So the butter will taste very different than, I guess, the average supermarket butter. I like to say we make butter makers butter. Like, this is the sort of butter makers would like to eat, simply because of the slow process in which we ferment and age and get the flavour into it. You know, the natural fermentation that gets all the flavours into the cream, and then once you churn it, you end up with this really rich, flavoursome butter that evolves and changes because it's a live culture that's in the butter as well.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
Mushroom growing is without doubt the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I was very lucky because a lot of my failings, I was able to do that as a hobby. But if I had made the same mistakes on a commercial basis, then I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be doing this.
This is The Producers. I'm Dani Valent. John Ford and his team at Unearthed Mushrooms grow gourmet culinary mushrooms in Victoria's Yarra Valley, supplying restaurants and a few retailers in Melbourne, Sydney and Adelaide. John has loved mushrooms since he was a teenager and eventually turned his hobby into a business. It's been far from easy, but he's as curious and passionate about fungi as he ever was, and is very happy to wear the mantle of the mushroom guy.
I am John Ford. I am the, founder and the chief grower of Unearthed Mushrooms. We're a gourmet culinary and medicinal mushroom producer in the Yarra Valley, just outside of Melbourne. Doing what I do because I really love mushrooms. Yeah, we've got, I think we're almost up to 20 different mushrooms that we have in like our repertoire. I guess we don't grow them all at the same time, but really something that drives me is kind of getting new and exotic mushrooms that, mostly haven't been grown in Australia, whether they be mushrooms from overseas or mushrooms from our native forests and so on. But yeah, that's sort of what really drives me. So we kind of do some of sort of the more standard exotic mushrooms like different types of oyster mushrooms, and king oysters, white oysters, yellow oysters, and so on. But we also we do lion's mane and some native varieties like snowflake. We've got a new variety that just came out, Miyataki, which is another overseas variety, but all up, we've got about 20, and we tend to run about 10 or 12, or about 8 to 12 in any one season, just sort of swap them out. So for us, it's all about diversity. It's all about getting things that are new and interesting, and always on the lookout for new varieties to be grown here in Australia for the first time.
Cultivating mushrooms is different from other agriculture. It's complicated, finicky, and very detailed. Unearthed Mushrooms grows mostly in shipping containers, each of them calibrated to create an environment conducive for growing a particular type of mushroom.
Yeah, the farm, it's not quite, green fields and gambling lambs. It's not really a traditional farm in that sense. I do like to try to grow kind of as close to nature as I can, which, when it's viable. So we're out in Monbulk in the Yarra Valley, and it's sort of where everything's out in the open air. The idea of sort of working within a sort of big factory or a facility has never been of interest to me at all. So we've actually got a fleet of shipping containers. So we've got a big sort of yard with many shipping containers, and within each of these containers is sort of a different environment. So it's basically trying to create a different autumn somewhere around the world to grow all these different types of mushrooms, because for us to grow so many, we've got to grow them in different environments so we all grow together. So we've got all these little all these shipping containers all around, and it sort of kind of looks not so much like a mushroom farm, I guess. And then I guess what we do have, we're always doing projects, I guess. So we've got a lot of outdoor mushroom grow beds. We've got sort of a log forest there as well. But I guess it's more what's inside the rooms, which is kind of the most interesting and sort of fascinating part of it. So we're really really dedicated to ensuring that our product is sort of 100% Australian and local through the whole chain, because it's not a simple process at all, growing mushrooms. And there's a very good reason that there's not a lot of people doing it, as in there's a lot of people doing it, particularly on scale, because it is complicated and it is difficult. So we grow, the mushrooms that we grow on sawdust. So they, what we call saprophytic mushrooms, which decompose it. So they eat dead wood, which is the role of mushrooms in the environment, is to sort of break down woody material. And if we didn't have mushrooms, we'd be kind of, buried in sticks and leaves and stuff. So what we do is we kind of take that idea of what do we feed them? We feed them sawdust, and then we get that sawdust at our farm from the Yarra Valley. So it's eucalyptus sawdust. We grow the mushrooms on that in our rooms, and then we send most of our product. So goes direct to restaurants. So we'll send that all mostly in Melbourne, but also in Sydney, and also by wholesale in Adelaide. Occasionally in other states as well, but most of our product goes there. There is some retail for us as well, but we're really sort of trying to get sort of local mushrooms to sort of local restaurants as much as possible.
John started foraging mushrooms as a teenager, entranced by their mystery and unpredictability. He loved eating them and later started growing them while pursuing a completely different career in seafood. He talks us through his mushrooming journey.
I guess I've always been a mushroom guy, and that's the thing, whether I was growing mushrooms or not. I kind of started with foraging as a teenager, sort of completely self-motivated. So I didn't have sort of, the Eastern European grandpa that took me out foraging. I don't have any stories like that. I just got me and a friend that were interested in mushrooms, and I think the interest for me was, I love the forest, but the idea that these mushrooms are so kind of mysterious and would just sort of come out of nowhere, that's the fleeting nature of them. You could never sort of quite predict where and when they were going to be there, and even what they were. And I mean, to the point where we still haven't scientifically described half of Australia's mushrooms. So it's kind of there's certainly this real mystery kind of quality about it that I really loved. So I kind of started from doing that and doing my own research and identifying and eating mushrooms from the wild. But it wasn't until, I guess, 6 or 7 years ago that I sort of grew my first mushroom. And when I found that out, I was like, well, I didn't even know that you could grow mushrooms in your backyard. All we knew was button mushrooms. I didn't, knew a little bit about oysters or shiitakes. And I was always drawn to it from a culinary kind of food perspective. So whenever there was mushrooms on the menu, I'd order it, and this is my entire life. If there's mushrooms on the menu, it gets ordered. So that's something that's always sort of drawn me, is the culinary aspect too, and what people are doing. I love to eat them. So the fact I could grow them, and started basically in my backyard. And I'm kind of person who, if I'm going to do something, I've got to do it well. And so it just kind of got bigger and bigger to the point where my wife was saying, what are you going to do? Is this going to be a job, or is this just going to be this kind of all-consuming hobby? So I sort of made that big leap and sort of started a proper farm. And it's definitely been the hardest thing I've ever done. It's definitely, I would never work as hard for anyone else than I've worked for myself. But it's been a great ride. I studied marine science, and I was a scientist at the university. So I did a lot of work, again, with food. I guess food has probably been a bit of a thread through sort of what I've done in my careers, because I was a marine scientist, but my actual love was seafood. And I guess, eating mushrooms and eating seafood is, two of my strong passions. So I spent, well over a decade sort of working in the sustainable seafood space. So working with a lot of fishermen all around sort of southern coastline, all around Australia, really, and sort of trying to sort of explain to some extent and promote sustainability around the seafood that we eat. And so I guess one of the things that I really enjoyed in that job was working with fishermen, about being on boats, and a lot of these fishermen, particularly the old ones, had a lot of pride in what they were doing. They were producing these really high quality Australian food product in the fish, and it was going to some pretty nice restaurants, and people were appreciating what they were doing, and there's a sense of satisfaction there. And it's, I don't know, in my experience as a scientist, there's not a lot of feedback, and there's not a lot of satisfaction. So I was still like, we really like to see that feeling that they've got, and that's sort of kind of where they kind of intersected. Where I was growing mushrooms as a hobby at the time, the sustainable seafood thing was, people want to talk about it, but really it's a hard thing to kind of have money around or find jobs around. So I just generally kind of moved over into, that sort of shrunk, and then the mushrooms grew and people wanted them, and I was going to chefs and they were saying, wow, this is a great product. And I was like, okay, I can do this. This is a great, this is a great part of the job. And here I am now running a farm with seven employees. So there you go.
Mushroom foraging is a very particular pastime, and John had no one to talk him through the niceties. What could go wrong? As it turns out, plenty.
Yes. Well, yeah, I've got some good ones and bad ones around that, around my first experiences of foraging. I remember going doing that to a friend's farm and just picking a lot of slippery jacks, which people will be familiar with. And like nowadays, I'm a kind of a 10% in the mushroom mix for slippery jacks. They've got this certain kind of texture. They've got that really jelly slipperiness to them. But back then, I think I probably got about 5 or 10 kilos of them because they were there, and I brought them back home and I cooked them into a curry. Curried slippery jack sounds crazy, but anyway, I think I was like 16 at the time. But I really loved it, and I was really determined to eat those mushrooms. And the other thing about slippery jacks is that they because of the sliminess or something, they do tend to react in your body a bit if you eat too much of it. And that's kind of exactly what happened when I was sort of, after 5 days, I'd eaten nothing but slippery jack curry, and I was a very sick individual. So I still remember that to kind of curb my excesses of foraging. And you don't need to pick 10 kilos at a time just because it's there, and you don't have to cook it up and eat it over the following day. So it's been more of appreciation there of you take what you need, and you respect that product a bit more. So that was a good one. But look, I had some foraging. Probably my best foraging experiences was in Germany when I was 18, and that sort of really opened my eyes in terms of what foraging could look like. Foraging for porcini, for chanterelles, and just like, wow, these really high quality mushrooms. And really being in forests that are truly beautiful, and that was something that I probably have the fondest memories of. Unfortunately, neither of those mushrooms are very common here in Australia, but over there it was quite special, and just sort of learning from older people, and that's something I didn't have when I was a child. My family wasn't interested in mushrooms, so it was all very much self-directed, and looking at books, and there was no internet or anything back then. Well, not really. It's probably bulletin boards or what are they called, but it was it wasn't so easy to get knowledge. So it was very much having to go out there and get it myself. So being taught by people over in Germany who had been doing it, and their families had been doing it for so many generations, it really instilled a real strong sense of confidence in me to be able to come back and forage for mushrooms.
Mushrooms are finicky creatures, and they're not always conducive to being grown in captivity. John shares why he's a fan of fungi failure.
Mushroom growing is without doubt the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. I was very lucky because a lot of my failings, a lot of my learning, I guess, I was able to do that as a hobby. But if I had made the same mistakes in those first sort of 2 years on a commercial basis, then I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be doing this, right? So it's and that's sort of one of those people that think that mushrooms are going to, mushrooms are the future. I'm just going to start up a mushroom farm. And the first advice I give is just give yourself at least 12 months of growing it as a hobby. And, that's where you need to, because there's no handbook. There was never been a handbook for me. And if anyone tries to write a handbook, most of it is actually not relevant. every one of our grow rooms, we have, they're all bespoke. They're all totally grown. They were totally built and designed by us for the mushrooms that we're after. I mean, there's no off the shelf. There's no off the shelf instructions. So we are learning and failing still constantly, and I think that is healthy. We've just got it to a point where it's that we've made them minor enough that, or we've covered the risk enough to make sure that we don't sort of go out of business. But it's a different kind. It's a very controlled way of growing food, and unless you have spent a lot of time in technology or spend a lot of money and time investing in technology, which is what happens in places like China, in Korea, in Taiwan, where we get a lot of the very cheap mushrooms imported from, like your gnocchi and the king oysters and so on. They've got a lot of money invested in the technology, and so really try to control it. And their farms only ever produce one type of mushroom. But when you're trying to do what I'm doing and growing a whole heap of different types of mushrooms and trying to be more organic about the way we do it, trying to be more intuitive and in connection with them, it's a constant learning, and it's a constant adapting. So it's a hard one. It's one of the something that I'm not sure whether I'm proud of, but I've done a bit of consulting onto people who wanted to become mushroom farmers. And unfortunately, no one I've ever consulted to has ever started a mushroom farm. So I don't know. I don't be too negative around it, but it is a really tough thing to do. And there's a lot of failing to be had.
So we know it's challenging to grow mushrooms, but why exactly is that? John explains why it's counterintuitive for mushrooms to grow in shipping containers.
You're taking something which comes out of a very complex ecosystem, and you're trying to grow it as a monoculture. And so straight up, it's something that really, you're taking things from the forest, right? Which has got, scores of different species around it, whether they be fungi, whether they be plants, whether they be bacteria, whether they be everything. And you've got all different tiny microclimates within that. You've got different areas of temperature, different areas of moisture within this. A forest is such an amazingly complex ecosystem, both biologically and sort of physically. And we try to take that, we're trying to take one species out of that, and you're trying to just grow that. Now, if you take something like an orange tree or a wheat plant, it's kind of, we're still growing those out in nature. But the only way to grow a mushroom in nature is to have a forest. You can't just grow it in a field. And so when you're trying to take these things, and it's sort of, okay, we're trying to simplify it. And so what happens is that the way we do it is, instead of trying to keep it really biodiverse and really kind of complex, we're trying to keep that ecosystem. We're actually trying to simplify it down to the only thing that we're growing is this mushroom, which is totally against, where the way it should be. And so we have a lot of problems with mushroom farming with kind of keeping things reasonably sterile. So you need to keep all the molds, all the bacteria, all those things out of what you're doing, because they're going to compete for food with your mushrooms. And so it's actually kind of very high. So you've got to be very clean and very sterile in a lot of the process. And so we have to bake up this. Well, we put in autoclave. We basically pressure cook the sawdust and so on, everything that we feed them. And then when we add the mushroom sort of spawn in there, which is the sort of seed of the mushroom, then that all needs to be extremely clean, and we can't let any competitors in there. So it's, in that way, is a very sort of controlled and technical sort of part of it. And then you actually move to the growing of the mushroom. And then each of these mushrooms require very specific and different conditions, and they tend to use different temperatures and different humidities over their life cycle as well. And so having to work with those and know them all, and also having nothing break down. Let's be honest, a lot of the problems that come to is that it's so finely controlled. If we have a humidifier that breaks down for an hour and we don't notice it on a hot day, we could lose thousands of dollars from crops. So it's just because they just dry out and die, because they're never exposed to that, because they're meant to be in a forest. They're meant to be protected by the diversity of the forest itself. But we're just sort of exposing them, and therefore if anything goes wrong, it really goes wrong.
Loving mushrooms is one thing. Growing them is another. But seeing your own mushrooms on a menu,
That
is unforgettable.
Very first time I ate my mushrooms in sort of cafe. This was out in this in Ferntree Gully. So this is sort of in the far eastern suburbs of Melbourne. A little cafe called Chosen Bean. I knew the chef there, and she was buying the mushrooms off me, and I've still got it on my wall. I'm actually looking at it right now. Is the framed menu with John's mushrooms written on it? And this is 2016 or 2015. So it's a while back anyway. And so just and that was a simple kind of mushroom dish with some, I think had feta, some some feta with it or something like that. But just that idea of it actually being that it's actually on the menu, and they're doing amazing things with it as well. It tasted great, don't get me wrong, but that was pretty amazing. But so that first experience, but like, oh god, so many great meals. I mean, part of what I really enjoy about what I'm doing is I get to go and eat what I've grown and what some really amazing people, chefs have done with the mushrooms. Let me think about a good one. I remember going to my first mushroom parfait was really, really special. That was out at Tarrawara Winery out in the Yarra Valley. That was done by Mark Ebbles. And that was just exceptional, how we can sort of mix these mushrooms together and create this, create something that doesn't, you can't recognize or see the mushrooms at all. And that mushroom parfait was absolutely excellent. So that's been a really good one. More recently, I've really enjoyed eating my mushrooms at Saray, and certainly Shane and Ross. So Shane and Ross there do amazing things over the fire, because just hitting that with hitting mushrooms just with fire, and just really, because the mushrooms that I grow are very, they're very, very fresh. So you can throw them in with high heat, and they just hold all that moisture in them. And they're not like the ones you get from the supermarket, which just you hit them with high heat and they just basically break down, and the water just just bubbles out of them. There, you can hit these mushrooms with heat, and they really hold it in. And that kind of treating by fire, really, really valued that as well. But there's been so many experiences. And that's something that I do really enjoy.
With dozens of mushrooms in his farming repertoire, it's hard to pick one that stands out. Can John pick a favourite?
The Maitake mushroom is one that we've kind of just released in the last 2 weeks, which is really exciting because it is one that is grown overseas. And it comes from all sort of temperate North America and through Asia and so on, and it's kind of highly prized, particularly in Japan. And as of sort of 6 months ago, it was sort of banned in Australia for import, sort of biosecurity reasons. And basically, most mushrooms are banned from import in Australia. So it's we're always very restricted in what we've been able to grow. And the reason for that is obviously biosecurity. Don't want these things coming in as pests. So basically, still holds that every mushroom is banned from coming into Australia, apart from a very small list, and they're the only ones we can import into Australia. And I think that list was probably made up in the 80s or the 90s, with whatever people wanted were importing at the time. So anything that sort of has become more popular or is a little bit sort of more obscure wasn't available to be grown, and we couldn't bring it into the country. So that changed with the addition of a number of different species late last year, which was awesome. I'm not sure why that happened. I'm still slightly suspicious about why that happened, but I'm very, very grateful for it. But one of them was Maitake. Maitake and the True Lion's Mane was brought on as well, and a few others. And so some of the more sort of commercially available species in other countries. So that was really nice. And so it does take a long time to grow, and it's notoriously a very difficult mushroom to grow, the Maitake. So it probably takes between 3-4 months to grow for the crop cycle. So this is kind of our first crop cycle. So within that 6-month period, since it was allowed in Australia, we have managed to get a culture from overseas, get it permits, get it imported. Then we had to sort of test it and grow it. And this is the first sort of fruits of our labour, I guess. So it's, it's pretty quick turnaround, 6-month turnaround, but it's pretty exciting. So we've got the Miyataki at the moment. I'm not totally sure where. So we've gone to gone to quite a few restaurants around the moment. I think we sent some off this week, sent them off to Society. We had some at Viewdemont the last week. It's gone over to the Botanic in Adelaide. We've had a lot of people asking for it. So it's been around, and it's pretty exciting to be bringing sort of a mushroom in for the first time. It may have been grown earlier. I'm not entirely sure. People might have longer memories and say, "Oh, I used to get that back in the early 90s or late 80s when they didn't have such import controls as they do now." But in my knowledge, it's not something I've ever seen or anyone I've talked to has had in Australia.
The journey so far has been pretty exciting and satisfying, but what's on John's horizon? He shares his hopes and dreams for a fab fungi future.
I think from a culinary point of view, I think we've sort of at a really good spot at the moment. I'm not sort of looking to take it to sort of a factory or facility scale. So I'm not looking to sort of, become, huge grower of mushrooms. That's not really what I'm in it for. As I say, I really enjoy working direct with restaurants and working direct rather than sort of working with retailers or anything like that. And I don't know if the time's quite right now for some of these mushrooms to be in supermarkets and so on, given that the majority of mushrooms are very cheap and most of them are imported. So we can't really compete from a culinary point of view in terms of expanding into sort of retail, into the retail side. Just that the price point, we just can't afford to do it in this country. So where we have been expanding, I want to obviously continue to working with chefs and with restaurants and sort of build bigger relationships and so deeper relationships there, and particularly around pre-planning, trying to get onto in terms of seasonal menu planning and so on, so we can grow a bit more specifically for restaurants, which we do a lot of, but it's sort of that would be something that I'd really like to work with a lot more. But in terms of expansion, I think that the place that we're looking to expand is more into the medicinal mushroom market, and certainly that is something that has grown a lot over the last few years. And mushrooms like lion's mane, like reishi, turkey tail, even maitake, cordyceps, and so on, they're very highly sought after. People are using them for their own well-being and health as sort of supplements or therapeutic, and potentially, although it hasn't been sort of given any stamps of approval, but potentially looking at how we can investigate their therapeutic benefits in the future too, so we can sort of sell them more on that scale. So that's sort of where we're putting a lot of our focus. We're really excited about growing cordyceps, which is a medicinal mushroom, but I've had a few chefs pretty interested in it as well. Having that sort of that sort of side of the business, I think is where sort of we're looking next. Also because it's new and interesting mushrooms, and I want to work with them. I want to find out how they, whether we can get them to grow and how that can work for us. So that's probably where we're looking at in the future.
Mushrooms are anything but boring. John has been fascinated by them for decades and doesn't see his obsession ebbing anytime soon. What is it that he loves about mushrooms?
What's so special about mushrooms? Coming back to that sort of idea of nature, of that idea of that they are sort of so secretive and so mysterious and so fleeting. I love that, and it makes them elusive, and it makes it difficult. And maybe this plays into why it's hard to grow mushrooms. But it's sort of that I love about it. They're not just. And at the moment, they're not just everywhere. You can't just. It's not easy to do this. So it's. I love that idea that it's kind of like a really kind of elusive and then special thing. A lot of these mushrooms, I love eating them. I mean, I think I've mentioned that before, but I do actually really, really enjoy eating my own mushrooms, and the fact that we have this entire kingdom of life where, historically, at least in this country, we've eaten one type of, one species of it, So, the field mushrooms, the portobellos, the buttons, the creminis, whatever, they're all the same species. So it's everything is, we've just grown them in slightly different ways. and we keep selling them as new products. So it's kind of like, we've got this entire kingdom. This is like totally untouched. We're not untouched, but obviously in different areas, different places around the world, they have much more, a much deeper relationship, a wider relationship with different species of fungi, and sort of bringing that to Australia is pretty exciting, I reckon. But yeah, I don't know. I've always liked mushrooms. They've made me understand. They made me believe. Oh no, it's belief, I guess. I don't know. It's just amazing and kind of awe striking when I sort of look back and go, something that has really been through my life. Like, if you talk to someone in my teens, if you talk to someone that knew me in my 20s or in my 30s, I'm 40s now, but then they would say, yeah, John, he's been the mushroom guy, right? So he's got this thing about mushrooms. It was never a job. It was never a thing. She was just into mushrooms, and to know that is now a job, and that's now, that's not something that sort of forms a very core part of my life. It's really heartening, I guess, to know that. So the journey's not easy, but that's a really kind of life affirming kind of thing. That to feel that. Like, that's always been my thing. I just want to grow really beautiful mushrooms. I want to, beautiful in form and beautiful in flavor and texture, and just to be able to really just appreciate that, the beauty of nature, and how we've been able to just harness that little bit of it and to be able to offer that to people. And so coming to the farm, I'm really happy to see the mushrooms. I'm really glad to see like what we've been able to achieve as a team, and it's really, that's really, really amazing, and that everyone's there with me. So I think the mushrooms are obviously incredibly important, because they're what's sort of the passion and what started it. But I think as a business grows, for me at least, it's become more about how you work as a team. And that's necessary. That's a necessity. I'm not sitting there as the overlord and these are my mushrooms and go work. We have to work with a living, breathing organism here, and so we all have to be in tune with it. And it's something that we share. We can't switch off in that way. And it's great to have everyone working to that. And working to that, and just to see the mushrooms as they go out, and just to feel, reasonably proud of, some of the restaurants they're going to and what people are going to be doing with them. And it's nice. I do enjoy it. It's the hardest job I've ever had, but it's also the most enjoyable.
Australia has come a long way from the days of nothing but button mushrooms. John Ford and his team at Unearthed Mushrooms work hard to grow beautiful mushrooms that chefs and diners appreciate for their appearance, flavour, and, importantly, their connection with the mysteries of nature. This is The Producers, a Deep in the Weeds production. I'm Dani Valent. Stay tuned as we talk to some of Australia's best farmers, makers and growers. Follow us on Instagram at Producers Podcast, or contact us via deepintheweeds.com.au.